Need to get started.
Great, good afternoon, everyone. I'm going to start us off with just a couple of housekeeping items before turning it over to Vice Chair. Just a reminder for those of you joining us online, if you can please keep your mic muted unless you are speaking. If we hear background noise, they may end up being muted for you, just so that you're aware. And if you are calling in, you can type *5 to raise your hand to make a comment, or *6 to unmute yourself. And for those of you joining online, also please feel free to raise the hand icon to make a comment.
Okay, I can officially call the meeting to order. It is Thursday, December 15th at approximately 12:05 p.m. Can I get a roll call from the clerk?
Eric Hessel,
Here.
Walker Modick,
Present.
Jeremy Orr,
Here.
Mary Ellen Micah, here. Charles Lipstro,
Here.
Melissa Stoltz, here. Andrea Tolsdorf, here. Sandra Wynn Stoltz.
I'm here.
And just for the record, and for those of you in the room, Sandra has a medical exemption and she will be participating online. So if you could please state the county that you're calling in from.
I'm in Kent County.
Great, thank you so much, Sandra. Michael Kelly.
Here.
Robert Mans,
Here.
Douglas McClure,
Here.
Fadi Murad,
Here.
James Clift, Jim Johnson, Trevor Van Dyke,
Here.
Gerald Tiernan. Thank you.
Here.
Thank you. It looks like all members are present, is that correct? Then,
Yeah, that's correct.
well, thanks to everybody that made the travel here today. I know that was, in some places in the state, it was a little dicey. So next on the agenda is approval of the agenda. I have a motion to approve.
Move to approve the agenda.
A move to approve by Melissa. Second by Mary Ellen. Any discussion? All those in favor of the approval of the agenda signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Minutes. Have a motion? Motion to approve the minutes by Mary Ellen.
Second.
Seconded by Melissa. Any discussion? All those in favor of approving the minutes signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. It's going smooth so far, everybody. Thank you. Member update. We have 3 new members and we have 1 reappointment. Fadi has been reappointed. Sometimes I question why we want to do this again and again, but hey, thank you, Fadi, for stepping up and participating again. Michael Kelly, Robert Mans, and Douglas McClure are new members. Welcome. And how about Michael, just tell us a little bit who you are, where you come from, who you represent.
I go by Mike Kelly. I work for the Conservation Fund, which is a national nonprofit organization. We're based in Arlington, Virginia, but I grew up and have spent my whole life working in Bay City, so that's where my office is. So glad to be here, glad to be of service.
Welcome.
Hi, Bob Manus, based in Traverse City, here with the Oil and Gas Association. We have an oil and gas company. We're the only company that's capturing CO2 and conducting enhanced oil recovery operations in northern Michigan. So happy to be involved with the group. Welcome.
Dr. McClure, I'm a recently retired environmental lawyer from the Ann Arbor area. I've actually worked with this particular rule, I think, once. I remember how we needed consultants to explain what it meant. Glad to be here. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you all for stepping up and doing this. It's important. So moving on to agenda item number 6, the meeting schedule. Typically, Dale, this is the monthly meeting, is that correct?
Correct.
And
So,
I-
yeah.
I was gonna say, typically when we do have a new chair and vice chair, you guys would, we will set these meetings, set them up for each month. And then Dale will reach out to you if there's nothing on the docket and make a decision of whether or not you want to hold the meeting or not. Is there anything you need to add there?
So we do need to set the schedule for next year for the Open Meetings Act. We have to post it for the next calendar year. So while we're all here, and wondering if the third Thursday of every month. The third Thursday of every month still works for everybody. It just is a standing meeting. Okay, and then do we want to continue with the noon to 2 o'clock slot, or do you want to work in a different time?
Works for me.
Good here.
Okay, I'll go ahead and get that posted then, and do you need a motion for that?
I was gonna say, do we need a motion for that?
I think that would be appropriate.
Can I have a motion to set the meeting schedule for the next year to the third Thursday of every month, beginning at noon? Second? Second. Any additional discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? We are scheduled. Item number 7, do we have Marissa or Trace here? Yeah, both. Come on up. Thank you, guys.
Stephanie, is that right?
It's not the right presentation, was it? Yeah. Oh, yep. You're up.
All right. Thank you all for having us here again today. My name is Melissa Barrington, and this is my coworker Tracy McDonald. We've been working on these rules for a couple of years now. And so we just went through the public comment process and we wanted to follow up with you and give you all a synopsis of how that went, what revisions were made. So if I can have this next slide. We'll kind of start off with a little bit of the rule background since some of you are new, and we also met a couple months ago just as a refresher. And then we'll go into the public comment and the public hearing and then the revisions that we made and some other considerations, and then we'll kind of open it up for any questions or discussion. Next slide, please. So to start with a little bit of background, this rule package has to deal with the 2015 Ozone Standard. This is one of the 6 criteria pollutants that EPA regularly sets a standard for. In 2015, they lowered that standard from 75 parts per billion down to 70 parts per billion. So in that process, when they make a change like that, we have to evaluate the areas in our state to see if they're in attainment, non-attainment, or unclassified. So for this ozone standard, you can see on the map to the left that we had several non-attainment areas identified. We have 2 partial counties on the west side, which are Allegan and Muskegon, and then a full county, Berrien County, at the lower southwest corner there. And we also had the 7-county southeast Michigan area as well. So we were given 3 years to attain the standard. Again, that designation was made in 2018. We were just given a marginal non-attainment status, which is the lowest one because we're only a little bit over the standard at the time. So we had about 3 years to attain the standard. We've remained at the standard is calculated based off the 3-year design value. So in 2021, we looked at that 3-year average again, and we're still just a little bit above the standard for those areas. So that kind of set off the process for us to be bumped up to that moderate classification. So you can see in the chart to the right, we have the differences laid out between the marginal and moderate classification. This rule package has to deal with the VOC RACT or reasonably available control technology requirement, and the 15% VOC reasonable further progress reductions that we're looking to gain. And those are both Clean Air Act requirements. And so that's what this package has to deal with. So if I can have us move on to the next slide, thank you. Again, this is a little redundant from the last presentation we gave, but I'll go through it quickly just as a synopsis as a background. So in the package specifically, we had a total of 37 rules that were impacted. We revised 20 of them and we created 16 new rules. And we rescinded one rule that was Rule 661, and that's basically just house some definitions for Rule 660. So we rolled it into Rule 660. So it was easier to read, easier to follow. Some of the bigger considerations we made while going through this process was obviously geographic applicability. These requirements are only required to be implemented in the non-attainment area. So for all of the VOC RACT rules, we had those only apply to the non-attainment area, whether it's a new rule or any revisions we made to our existing rules only applies to the non-attainment area. The exceptions to this are our consumer products and architectural industrial maintenance or AIM coding groups. Those are typically applied statewide just because of the nature of the products that they affect being at stores. So that is consistent with how other states implement those and how we have implemented them in the past. So other than that, we also looked at existing dates. So these requirements are only supposed to impact existing sources, which is why they're in this Part 6 rule package. We have a separate part for new sources of VOC. So I think other than that, we just had a couple miscellaneous revisions, such as to our cutback asphalt, which was just extending the ozone season because it was revised by EPA prior to the standard coming out. So we needed that to align in order for our rules to be approved at this point. We did reach out to industry and they didn't think that was going to have any impact on their production or anything. Then we just did a little bit of cleanup as well within the rule while we had it.
So that kind of caps the review. So since we last met and discussed this rule package, we had a public comment period that ran from September 26th through October 26th. And as we usually do, we opened a public hearing then at the end of that time. And so we had a public hearing on October 26th from 1 to 3 p.m. We did have one individual attend and we had a few people call in. They also, I think all of them may have provided written comments as well, but either way, we have the recordings and we took all of the information we need to take during that public hearing. So you can see that in summary, we received 13 separate submittals from either groups or individuals. And of course, each one of those submittals may have had multiple comments in them. It's a little subjective as to how to categorize them. I guess we were harsh on ourselves and called zero in support because if they made the large category you see there is the mixed, where if they said something, they gave us a nice complimentary sandwich, or they said something nice and then gave us their comments and then finished nicely again. So we put that in the 12, the neutral mixed category. And then the one that was just, a straightforward, they asked us to consider, it was from SEMCOG down in Southeast Michigan, that if the redesignation status of Southeast Michigan changed during this process, that we could remove them from this because they would potentially no longer be in non-attainment, but that hasn't happened. So that was the one that we categorized as being against. So because of those comments, we made 20 revisions to the rules, and those are listed in the JCAR report.
We'll just kind of touch on the nature of the comments, kind of at a broad level. We tried to summarize them here for you. I'll kind of briefly touch on the revisions that we did make, although we have separate slides for those that we'll go into more detail on. And then I'll give a little bit of detail on some of the reasons why we did make some of them. So we had some general, a comment for general language cleanup. So things like punctuation errors, those kinds of things that were missed. So actually we revised those because we want them to be as clean as possible. And then we had some comments to revise some of the definitions, mainly dealing with the oil and gas industry, which we did make revisions to those that we'll talk about in a little bit. There was some comments to extend the implementation deadline, which is set for March 1st of 2023. And so we were able to make some carve outs for some of those, but for the vast majority of our rules, they need to be implemented at the March 1st, 2023 deadline in order for us to count those emission reductions towards our 15% RMP requirement. So we'll talk a little bit about the carve outs that we did make, but for the most part, we had to stick with that March of 2023 deadline. We also had some comments for inclusions of exemptions for specific processes and different types of equipment. We did our best to incorporate as many off-ramps and exemptions as we could throughout the rules. One of our main concerns is making sure that the rules are understandable. And so when we get comments for some exemptions for specific rules, that is an exemption that might not actually even apply to that source category at all. We can't create an exhaustive list in every one of our rules because it would become very, very lengthy. So we do our best to kind of walk that line between what's helpful for industry and for field staff, having exemptions in there versus what might be more implied. And then we also had some comments for the revision to the applicability thresholds. So these were specific to a couple different coding rules, which we had to put the applicability threshold down to a 15-pound per day level. We do understand there's a lot to be had for industry to have that flexibility to have more of a monthly or an annual limit where possible, just for record keeping purposes. It makes it a little easier, a little less resource intense. However, our rules for these RACT rules have to be based off of the EPA's control technique guideline documents. And within those, they're very prescriptive about what is and isn't allowed. So where we could, we did implement the tons per year thresholds, but in some of those coding rules, it had to stay at the 15 pounds per day, just so that we weren't backsliding. For example, in an existing rule, we had a monthly limit already. We couldn't extend it to that yearly. We had to keep it to the pound per day limit. So other than that, we had, as Tracy talked about, the comment to remove Southeast Michigan upon redesignation. So at this point in time, with the decisions made, there are ongoing conversations, but right now they're still in non-attainment. And if they are bumped up the timing for that, they would still need these rules to be in place by March of 2023. And with the way the rules process works, it obviously takes us a long time to get these through. So we wouldn't be able to meet that requirement if we were to take them out at this point in time. So we've left them in. And then we also had some requests for different allowances for alternatives, which generally we're able to incorporate into our rules. We did make revisions to incorporate those. We have a Rule 602, Sub-Rule 2, which allows for alternative RAC for unique circumstances for industry. So we were able to roll those into that portion of our rule. And then lastly, the other major comments we had were extensions of deadlines required within the what we call case-by-case RACT. And that's under 602 Sub-Rule 4. The list is different than the alternative RACT I just spoke about. So Sub-Rule 4 has to do with facilities who are not applicable to our rules at all, but they're still a major source of VOCs. And so they're required under the Clean Air Act to provide some sort of RACT analysis that shows what is reasonable for them to implement. So we had some requests to extend those deadlines, which we did, and we'll talk more in depth about those in a couple slides. Okay, so we wanted to talk a little bit about the different avenues we pursued while we were reviewing comments and in order to address the comments to the best of our abilities. So we worked with AQD staff. We had many conversations with our management about certain comments, and then also collaborated with our permit staff regarding the incorporation of some of the test methods and different recommended language surrounding limits, because they're more the experts on there. So we like to reach out to them when we can. So did that. We also had conversations with EPA regarding that case-by-case RACT, extending the deadlines. Ultimately, we want these rules to be approvable. So it was good that we had open communications with them throughout this process. And then we also did a good bit of stakeholder outreach. We have an ongoing stakeholder work group that we've been meeting with over the past couple of years, and they've been really great resources to pull from. They have, the expertise in their industry, which is always great for us to get their feedback on things. And obviously, a lot of them made comments, so we were able to reach out to them. So we did a lot of work with our AQD toxic staff, as well as the industry consultant who requested an addition of an exemption for paradichlorobenzene, which is in solid air fresheners. So there's a lot of back and forth to kind of find our middle ground there with them. And then we also had ongoing conversations and some follow-up with a Michigan paint manufacturer regarding his comment to extend the timing for small paint manufacturers under the AIM rule, which was a new rule for us. So we were able to work with him and again, find a nice middle ground. And then we also met with the Michigan Manufacturing Association and a couple representatives from there, just to kind of talk through the comments that they had made and our reasonings behind why we were able to make some of the changes and not others. And then lastly, we're in the process of developing additional documentation surrounding the public comments that we received. We have the JCAR report, obviously, and that addresses any revisions we did make. But like I said, we have been engaged with our stakeholder work group for many years, and they've been very helpful. And so we wanted to provide an additional documentation for them and the public surrounding the revisions we didn't make and kind of our decisions behind that, so that was better explained and just a little bit more transparent. Lots of talking, sorry. So now we'll kind of talk about the revisions that we did make. Again, some of these I did touch on already, so I'll kind of skim through those, but we were able to update some of our existing definitions to match the federal program. Again, this had to do mostly with the oil and gas comments that we received. Just making sure there's consistency across the standards that they need to apply as best as possible. We also incorporated additional allowance of the alternative test methods through our 6022 process. And that went well, and that's what we had discussions with permit staff surrounding, just to make sure that the test method they're requesting was appropriate. We also extended the compliance schedule for our 6024, which again is the case-by-case RACT. So initially the proposed rule required facilities to submit their initial facility information and potential to omit calculations within 1 month of the rule promulgation. And so we were able to extend that to 3 months after the rule promulgation, just to give them more time to get that information gathered, especially with the PTE calculations. Those can take a little bit of time. And then additionally, there was a requirement for them to submit their RACT proposal under this rule, and that was extended from 3 months out to 6 months, because that is quite a robust proposal. And we felt that was a fair number to rest on at the 6 months. And then finally, we had the schedule for completing their implementation of the RACT proposal was to be completed within 6 months after department approval of that RACT proposal. And so the request, I think, was to expand that to a full year due to some of the natures of the current supply chain issues that we're facing, in case they need to get control equipment and that sort of thing. And we definitely recognize that can be an issue in certain industries. So what we did there was kind of compromise and keep the 6 months, but then also allow for approval of an alternative timeline by the department if that's requested. So also within that rule, there was a comment for adding a de minimis threshold in order just to avoid those smaller emission units that would need significant analysis through this rule, but wouldn't really end up requiring any technical or I'm sorry, it wouldn't end up being technical or economically feasible for them to actually implement control options. So the whole analysis would kind of be moot at that point. So we were able to talk with EPA about this, and we added in a 2.7 tons per year exemption limit. So that's very similar to the other rules that we have in this package, and it aligns pretty well. There is a cap to that. If they do meet up to 25 tons per year for those exempted emission units, then they would have to do the analysis for all of those, since that's more of a significant VOC emission. And then lastly, we just added some clarifying language, so where we needed to add in more definitive language, like defining key set printing and that sort of thing. And then we corrected some erroneous mistakes. So there was a couple mix-ups with the wrong printing definitions being used and that sort of things that we also were able to make those changes. We certainly appreciated the comments. So with that, Trace has a couple more that he'll talk through.
So as Marissa mentioned, we are trying to, our guidelines for these are control technique guidelines. So those are documents put out by EPA. We call them CTGs for short. Oh, can you go back one slide? There you go. And so we're trying to read those, and they vary from, I think the first one, earliest ones maybe in the late 70s or something like that. And now the most recent one is, I think, 2016. So they've evolved over time, and those documents are better now for guiding our rulemaking than they probably were in the past. And so that makes things a lot easier for us. One of the newest ones is in the oil and gas industry. So we made some changes. But I guess to explain, when we talk about implementing these documents, they're pretty well prescribed, but there are spots where there's some wiggle room, and we have to figure out if, what we can do to utilize that in a way that's responsible, from a mission standpoint and from a, imposition on the stakeholder, the affected source. So again, we're kind of working through these, and I guess when we talk about discussing this with EPA, sometimes EPA can be pretty good about telling us what they'll plan to approve and what they plan to not approve. So we have a kind of a bright line. And sometimes they're a little less until they want to see some documentation in front of them. So I guess I just wanted to kind of emphasize that as we do this, we're trying to navigate between those, but sometimes we don't have the best information as to whether or not it's going to be acceptable. So we have to just kind of pick a lane and see if we'll have to find out if it works out once we apply for approval to EPA. So that's where we like these public comments, because we can then modify things and try to find those nuances to help the regulated community. So again, several comments were received from the oil and gas industry. It's one of the newest CTGs. It's a set of rules that a lot of what Marissa's talking about we're kind of editing our existing rules in a lot of ways, or they were very similar to other coding processes that we had. So we're kind of in a comfortable place. Oil and gas is a little bit new to us, so we had a lot of comments and we were able to make some changes. And so here's a couple of them. We incorporated an allowance for certification from an approved engineer under a federal regulation. So a lot of times we're trying to balance a federal regulation with a state regulation and trying to make sure that there's not too much redundancy, if any. It's preferable, or if there is, we can use that to our advantage as an offering. And that was, I think, the case for this one. We tried to see if we could expand, make it a little more flexible. We included options for alternative performance testing as approved by the department under the oil and gas rule. And again, that phrase approved by the department is a kind of a controversial one when we're dealing with EPA. They don't want to give up oversight, but then they also want us to have some flexibility where we can allow it. So those are issues that we try to sort through ahead of time, but ultimately sometimes EPA doesn't make that decision until we've, again, formally submitted them. So that we'll see how that goes. We tried to put in some more flexibility for the regulated community in those. We revised the requirement to allow for either rod packing replacement every 36 months or rod packing emissions to a process. So there's a good example of one where maybe the CTG wasn't really specific, and when the industry was able to tell us that this, and it made sense to us that it would be the way we had originally worded it was probably overkill, then we could allow something to substitute for it. So that was a change we made there. Again, there was a handful more, I think, oil and gas industry, but these are some of the bigger ones. Along with that, we made a change, as Marissa already mentioned, about the paradichlorobenzene used in urinal cakes and semi and solid air fresheners. As long as we talked to our toxicologists and we realized that we could keep people safe as long as they were used in more of a ambient area. Those are air fresheners that are used in usually industrial settings anyway. And then finally, we had a small manufacturer of paint. So the AIM rule is, affects architectural industrial maintenance coatings. And it covers both the manufacturer in the state and the sale of them in the state. We had one small manufacturer in the state who was concerned that the deadlines were too cumbersome for a company of his size to make the modifications to the formulations. He can make them, he just needed more time. And so what we did is made a carve out because it was a small company in the grand scheme of the calculations which is why we're implementing these rules. It was insignificant enough that we could do a carve out for small companies, and it ended up just being, we think only 1 or 2 companies in Michigan would be affected by that, that carve out. But, and statistically, it's not a lot for, in the way of emissions.
So like I said, we had some other considerations that we're keeping in mind during this comment period. Like I mentioned before, the informal response to comments document that we're drafting up, which should be available to the public in a couple weeks, just to provide a little bit more transparency there. And we're also starting our outreach for these rules. We understand the deadlines came quickly with the March of 2023 implementation deadline. So we are working on getting some outreach done outside of our stakeholder work group. We did have quite a big work group, and it's great to get the word out to them, but obviously it's not going to reach everybody. So we're working on doing that as well right now. And then we're also, like I mentioned with some of these revisions, we're just human error type things, and we understand that we're humans. We're not going to get it right, especially with this big of a package, addressing so many rules, creating so many new rules. We're sure that as we implement the rules in industry, there's going to be some changes needed down the road. So we're open to having an additional Part 6 rule package in the works for after this one closes, and once we kind of see where the weak spots are. Generally, when we're writing these rules, we try to keep them as broad as we could while still having that understandability there for industry to be able to follow them and for our staff to be able to implement them. But we do understand that sometimes more clarity can be better, but we wanted to leave the door open at least for this first rule package going forward. And ultimately, our big thing here with this rule package is the Clean Air Act timing. So in order for us to take credit towards the RFP requirement, we do have to have these implemented by March of 2023.
You know, in general, we do keep track of all suggestions for all of our rules as part of our unit's work, so that we're constantly collecting comments for improvements. We're always looking for improvements and corrections or ways we can make them better, and that's something we do ongoing. We don't want to try to drag you guys in here a lot, so we try to make sure we package them together and space them apart. But that is something with this many changes, we just suspect. And we've already have some ideas of things that we might be able to do down the road if necessary for part 6 and in general.
Next slide is just the,
Questions?
yeah, so.
I'm gonna start, I have a couple. What happens, you mentioned you have to send some of this to the EPA. What happens if the EPA opposes? What happens then?
We would have to figure out why they, we would have that discussion with them. We have that a negotiation of sorts. I mean, and then we would have to come up with a solution, and then we'd have to potentially modify the rule. If they won't approve the rule until, or they can conditionally approve the rule, they can partially approve the rule, or they can just disapprove the rule. Usually what they end up doing is they just don't do anything, and they let us come back, change the rule. And this happens all the time with our packages. I mean, not all the time, but it's happened many times through the years. And then, so we fix the rule and then we resubmit.
Okay. And then, out of all the comments and the work with industry, was there anything major that the industry brought up that you were not able to work through?
I mean, there's a lot of changes we couldn't make, but it's our hands were kind of tied by the CTG. I don't know, I can't think of anything.
I think for the most part, our priority was on addressing those major comments that came in. So some of the comments we didn't make were, more with clarity than needed more time to dig in, but we made sure to prioritize those ones that were major that would actually change the way the rule is implemented or the way facilities have to work with the rule. So.
I'd like to rephrase your question. Is there any changes that you didn't make will cause the compliance issue, especially from a timeline standpoint, and render a business not to be able to afford or to comply in a way that is economic?
Great question, or rephrasing of a question. So as far as that goes, that's kind of what our Rule 602 is in place for. So facilities, if they are in that scenario where they cannot implement or what is in our rule is infeasible for them, they can go through that process and make that demonstration that look like this won't work for our facility, here's why. It's a bit of a lengthy process. We've had it in our rules in the past. It hasn't been used too much, so we did go through and revise that. But that is one route that they can take.
Yeah.
To that.
I would just say that, and that does extend the time frame for those individuals. And we're hoping, of course, because again, this is about some math here about getting our reductions that we need. And then that would hopefully be not too many sources.
Can I follow up? Sure. Okay, with respect to the CDG, it identifies what commonly available as far as controls and things like that. But is there a pathway for a business to be able to conduct a case-by-case RACT analysis that may be inconsistent with the CTG that shows from an economic analysis that it's not feasible if there is a threshold or a policy on that? Is that?
No, that is what the Rule
That's what
602
the
is. That is exactly the
Thank you. I
point of
just
Rule
wanted to
602.
clarify.
Yeah. We have two parts in Rule 602. One is for companies that have, there is a source in that, or they have a rule that should apply to them, they just can't meet it. And then there's the other part is if you don't even have a rule, but you're a big source of VOCs, you do these case-by-case RAT.
Jeremy, I think, and then
Just a few questions. One, thanks for the presentation and all the work you all put in, not only into the presentation, but into the rule as well. I think it's really difficult. In particular, I'm impressed with the piece of the revisions directly tied to the public comments. That's hard to do in a reasonable way as we've seen on this committee. So thank you for that and summarizing that. I just have a few kind of minor questions. One, with the interactions with EPA, what level does that happen at? Is that regional or is that a national kind of EPA office? That's the first question.
Okay. Yeah, so with our discussions with them, we typically reach out to our Region 5 staff. We have specific people who work with these RACT rules, and so they're really great resources to talk to. As far as once the rules get approved into the SIP, that would be at
Well, the regional level still does it, but I think they consult more on a national level, but it's the regional, the Chicago regional office, it's, the Midwest states. And that way, what's nice about that is that they have the perspective of the surrounding states, so that they're kind of keeping some consistency. I mean, hopefully they're keeping consistency across the country too. They strive for that, I know, but yeah, the same people we're talking to at Region 5 are the same people who might be reviewing Ohio's rules and Illinois' rules and Indiana's rules, and so keeping perspective similar.
Second question was, I see there were comments submitted by what looks like an attorney from Warner. Who are they representing? Warner Norcross, Troy
That
Combs?
one, oh, he was representing the manufacturer of the air fresheners, the urinal cakes and air fresheners, and he was representing him, that company. And actually, not only did he, but they also had an association representative, and those two worked together with me to sort through that.
Okay. And then last question I had was, could you say more about the SIMCOG? Explain that a little better. I'm kind of myself confused as to them
yeah.
trying to opt out of it.
Yeah, so I didn't go into that sort of background, but so with the designation of non-attainment, the 3 years where we had to reevaluate was based off of 2018, 2019, and 2020. And so that 3-year average was still in non-attainment, but once we finish out the 2021 year, those values showed us in attainment for that area. So we were able to file what's called a redesignation request, and it just basically lays out kind of what I just said, that based on those new data, we are in attainment. So EPA is still in the process of kind of going through that to see if they're going to approve or disapprove of that. So we don't have an answer on that, but we're also in like a weird standstill with the bump up. They haven't given us an answer on that. So like I said before, with the way the rules process works, if we are bumped up, these rules need to be in place. And so I think they're likely to do that fairly soon or tell us something fairly soon.
Oh, and she did mention that, unfortunately then, so those 3 years we were in attainment, but then in 2021 and 22, most recent ozone season, we slipped back over that cusp. So that's why they stopped. That's where the controversy is and why they have to decide, was it sufficient that we were there and now it's have slid back, or does that count? Yeah.
So
It's
there's ongoing discussions
discussion,
about it,
yeah.
but yeah, it hasn't been settled yet, which is why that comment came in.
And what SEMCOG was doing, or SEMCOG made that comment, because of course we wanted to remove the necessity for these rules to apply to those 7 counties if they were going to be in attainment. And because of our process, if we don't receive a public comment on something, we can't make that change. So it's convenient for us. I mean, we actually appreciated that comment, because otherwise our hands would have been tied and we kind of would have had to promulgate them, or, you know, I don't know, or we would have had to read public comment, which would have extended everything and then pushed us back beyond that deadline that we're shooting for March 1st for that, the reasonable further progress, yeah, requirement.
Thank you.
So I appreciate this chart, and maybe from JCAR that talks about all the comments and then the revisions that were made by the agency. Is there a similar place where comments might have been summarized that no action was taken? Is that
Yes.
available that?
Yeah, we don't have a draft version with us right now. It's something.
Okay, that's part of your process. You're going to produce that as well to say, here are comments that were made, didn't take action and for the following reasons or.
Yeah, we're not required to, but we thought typically for the air quality rules, we don't get too much engagement because it's fairly straightforward, but with this rule package being so, having so many revisions and that sort of thing, we felt that was a good thing for us to put together. So hopefully in the next week or two, we'll have that out.
And not only for stakeholders and commenters, but even for our own documentation, because there's a lot has went on, a lot of decisions have been made, so we wanted to implement it ourselves. Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, 2 quick questions, but also I think we got all the comments in our packet that were received. So I know they're gonna produce it, but there's nothing, it's pretty transparent, what we received, if I'm correct.
Yeah, but not.
Yes, not your correct, or why not? Okay, great. So one just random question that I honestly don't know, and I know it's not this rulemaking, but what struck me as I was reading this, obviously this is about outdoor air quality standards, which is what EPA regulates. VOCs are real nasty. Pieces in the public health research is showing us a lot more every day about how bad they are. And so I'm wondering, where is our rulemaking around indoor air quality and the workers that are being exposed to these toxins?
That is not, to my understanding, that's not under our purview.
Sure, okay, so I just did not know. And then my second question is, I know we talked about the impact to business. Did you make any changes or any compromises that you think are detrimental to public health?
No, we were very careful with the ones, the toxics. So this is a VOC issue. This is a VOC rules. We spent a lot of time talking about that paradichlorobenzene and the air fresheners, but that's a toxics issue. And we did a lot, we had 2 toxicologists get involved. And we went through that. So we phrased it and negotiated with the company to try to get a rule that we felt protected human health. And as far as the other, any of these other changes, it's really about flexibility for the stakeholders. But I don't think we couldn't give up. We couldn't give up reductions of VOCs. We're already struggling to meet that requirement. And so when it comes to VOCs, we have to minimize VOC. So if we made a concession, it was probably because it didn't impact VOCs. It was just something we were trying to make it so that stakeholders and the regulated community could more easily conduct business, and yet it would have no negative impact on VOC. So I'd say that's, by the nature, we were fighting for every pound of VOC we can keep.
Yeah. Trace, and Marissa, either one of you, but, follow up on Semgar. You started mentioning about that if the area gets redesignated as not, as attainment as a future, could the rules go away? Could you elaborate on that as to why that's not possible once they are in place?
Well, it depends on when. I mean, there is, if they've not been approved into our SIP, it's still possible that we could, even though the rules have been promulgated and they're effective in the state of Michigan, until they're approved into our SIP, I think we could modify them. So I think we still may have a window even after promulgation. It's just that we'll then go back and forth and we have to decide if we want to do that. And
Like what decision comes first, I think plays into it as well.
Yes.
So there's a lot of moving parts, so it's hard to give.
right, because if something takes place and they think that because that took place, they saw an improvement, then you can't go back. There's no backslide.
Yeah, the anti.
So that, I think that's where how they craft that bump up decision might have an impact as to whether or not we're allowed to undo anything that we've already done.
And that is the issue for Semgar, right? Is wanting to redesignate. Eliminate the rules once the area gets redesignated.
Well, again, they asked that question because of that, that public comment was, back in whatever, October. We were, fingers crossed, we thought this might get resolved in November, might get resolved this, now we're seeing it's probably not gonna get resolved until, January. We're expecting now, the latest we're hearing is in January, it might get resolved.
So regarding surface coatings, I saw a number of comments from coating manufacturers. I think both touch-up manufacturer and the non-aerosol type of coating manufacturer. Did you receive any comments from the industry, like folks who are actually using these coatings, and any concerns about the ability to achieve their quality standards?
Yeah, so we did receive comments from the Michigan Manufacturing Association, which represents a lot of those coating facilities. I'm not obviously sure who exactly made the comments, but they did have some concerns regarding, again, like that 15 pounds per day, which we tried to adjust as much as we could. They had made a comment that you might have saw about there's an option within our coding rules that allows for them to use an overall control efficiency, which is typically, I think, ranges from like 85 to 90%. I believe their comment was just talking about how some of the backed analysis can be lower than that. So they were curious why that difference was there. Again, we're following the CTG guidelines when we're implementing the rules, and that was what they had their limits put at. So if we wanted the rule to get approved, we couldn't really bring it down. But another thing that goes in with that is that the coding rules generally have about 3 options. They can either apply using lower VOC content coatings, or they can use that overall control efficiency if they want to implement a control, or they can use a combination of both. So we try to implement all of those within the rules, all those options, just so they had some flexibility. So we kind of explained that to them when we spoke with them, and they seemed okay with that decision.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Not seeing any, so thank you. Very well done.
We know that at some point in this process, the public has an opportunity to comment as well. And if depending on how this procedure works, if you want to ask us any of those questions, if they ask questions that you want to know the answers to, we're available for that as well.
You teed us up for the minutes from Jen. I guess I have a question for under public comment. Do we have any rules, timing, length of comment that I need to announce?
I wouldn't say that there are rules, but it's been my experience that this committee and other similar bodies, in the interest of efficiency, especially if there are a lot of commenters, would certainly indicate at the outset that people will be limited to 3 minutes, 5 minutes, whatever, for their comments, just to ensure that anyone who wants to comment has the opportunity to do so. But it's not a rule per se. You can certainly, it's a common practice as a body, decide that presumptively each person will get some fixed time, 3 minutes, 5 minutes, whatever you want to decide.
Do we know right now how many on on the phone?
There's 24 individuals on the phone, but I don't know that we know any of those are going to speak on the phone.
Okay, and then do we have, is that phone and video that you're saying, or just,
I'm sorry, that's on video.
that's on video? Do we have anybody that's called in? Or phone?
No one.
So the first public comment was for phone participants. Do we have? I'm assuming that's, if there's a call-in number that's not video, is that correct?
We would see that right here, and we don't have anybody.
You don't have any? Okay,
We're good.
so we can move on from that. So video participants, do we have any public comment for video participants? And if so, please state your name and
Go ahead and raise your hand if you'd like to provide a public comment, if you're participating online.
Jeannie?
I am not seeing anybody. There's nothing. Thank you.
We're okay. I don't see any video. Is there anybody in person who would like to comment? Anybody? Oh. Well, that was easy. Okay, so we're gonna go into the next portion of this session, and I think we're probably going to look at the deliberation part. And do we need to go over this at all? The rule we have to follow ourselves? We need to go through that, especially for new members, or?
Yeah, we can do that. Let's see if I can pull that up here. So. For the ERC statute, section 8.
Right, so does this go back to the very beginning of what we did before? Is that all included
We
here?
do have that slide available if we want to look at that.
But, so this here is just from today on, this is
It is.
what we're at right now.
Mhm.
This is, okay.
Yep, but I can go ahead and show the slide that we looked at with the criteria before, if you guys would like to go through that again.
I thought maybe just for the new members, they should see what we've already done in the past. Because this has come back to us, that we followed, you can see there.
And these slides are also in front of you, just in case.
Right. And did we not agree to all these?
We did,
That's correct.
yep,
I
so,
don't know why
when we-
only one of them is checked, but
yeah, I didn't go through and check them all, I'm sorry. But yes, we did go through all of the criteria in the previous meeting when we reviewed, the RIS and the draft rules. Oh, here, go ahead. So part of the so this slide shows the criteria that we have to evaluate the rules and the RIS against. And then we took a vote to go ahead and proceed to the public hearing and public comment phase. And then we also took a vote to come back and review the public comments that were made with this rule set. So that's where we're at right now.
is there, can you show that decision making on that where we could have just sent it and been done with it, or we could have it come back? Is that,
Don't have that, but I can pull it up because I have those slides from the last.
just to be clear for everybody, so there was a choice that we could have just said we were done with it, but we had enough information to say, there's probably gonna be a lot of comment. So we made the choice in our vote to let it go to public comment, let the department have a chance to revise based on that and come back to us, which is why we're here today. So thank you for doing that. I know that's an extended process and Jeremy beat me to it, but thank you for that pretty specific review. And then, so now we're back to deliberation, and I guess the first thing is does anybody have in this group in our committee. Is there any comments you want to make or deliberate on the package that's before us before we move on to the next step? We'll open it up.
If I could just ask a somewhat related question. When you went through those criteria, those that you all agreed were met last time, how does this group make decisions about scientific reasoning and balancing burdens on engineering? Where do you get that information from to make that decision?
Does anybody want to jump in on that? So, I can say personally, and if anybody else was here and would like to comment, but, we could ask those questions of the department at the time.
I see.
And there was public comment available, so if somebody had public comment and was like saying, this is crazy, it's unreasonable, it's an undue burden, that would have been information we would have had. We didn't have that.
Yeah,
So based on the fact there was very limited comment, and we could ask the experts that were here, then we could say that I think that we voted to affirm that it was
Okay.
reasonable.
so you could say to someone, tell us why this is based on sound and objective scientific reasoning, and see what they say.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
And correct me, we got last time in August, I'm looking at it, the regulatory impact statement too, which isn't part of this packet.
Right.
Because it was in the previous, and that helps, like staff actually help us answer these questions. And there's a
Oh.
whole bunch of things that they have to respond to too, that's part of the packet.
Thank you.
We just.
Thanks for bringing it. I forgot that. The
Yeah, I know, I had to
regulatory
pull it up, I
impact
was like, this
statement.
feels like something we know.
Yeah.
Recommendation.
It's
Thank
not
you.
just out of the blue. There is.
No,
more.
I'm certain of that.
But we're not, and some of us, we're not. Some may be scientific. I might have a science background, but not everybody does. So it's important that we have that information ahead of time.
Great.
Any other discussions or deliberations on what we've been presented today?
I'd like to offer my gratitude to staff. This is really hard work, and the fact that the narrative you told us, assuming it is accurate, is that you worked really hard with stakeholders to try to find compromise, to really understand challenges, to see where there was space, where there was room to move, and then to be candid about where there wasn't. And that's very challenging and something that is as wide ranging as these rules. So I just want to offer gratitude. Sometimes we don't say thanks enough. So thank you for your words.
And I see Dale, you put up here, that's what we were going with before. Right?
So no, this is actually
This is
for today. Do you want to go through what we did before?
No,
Okay,
unless you guys want to see that.
so, just to go backwards a little bit, we do have to provide the ERC, the J card agency report. And, you received that on December 5th, and that was also posted online for the public on December 5th. And then here we are today with 3 options in front of us.
And so I guess, if there's no more deliberation, then I think we're on to, item 10 on the agenda, which is under section 66(9). We have one of 3 actions that we need to vote on. Do I have a motion?
Motion to approve.
I have a second.
I'll second that.
Second. Any further discussion in the group? Hearing none, all those in favor of approving, the package under, I guess, item number 1 under section 66(9).
I didn't do a motion for you.
Oh, thank you. So do I need to read that? Or is that, because I already have a motion to approve.
You're fine.
We're fine. Okay. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. That conclude item 10 now?
It does, yeah, unless you guys would like to see overview of next steps. This will be submitted to JCAR right after this meeting, and you can definitely follow the rest of the steps of the rulemaking on the ERC website, or you can go to Moore's website for pending rulemaking and follow the progress there through JCAR.
Will this help you guys meet your deadline of March 1st? Merry Christmas. Hey, we got the next thing on here, which is going to get me out of this duty for the future. We have to vote. Now, do I have to do separate votes for one for the chair, one for the vice chair, or can we do a motion together since we have two, we only have two, we have one chair nominee and one vice chair nominee.
I don't see any reason why you couldn't combine the selection of both positions in a single motion.
They're also happy to offer those. Someone's heart is so excited about these positions. We should not deny them the chance to feel fulfilled.
So I guess before we go into, voting, does anybody on the committee, feel strongly enough that you want to put your name forward to be either the chair or the vice chair for this coming year or 2 year
term.
2 year term? I don't see anybody. So having said that, I'm going to make a motion on this, if you guys would let me, because I need to make sure the language is clear. But I make a motion that, let me make sure that Melissa Stokes, it will become our chair, and that Jeremy Orr will become our vice chair, effective immediately following the meeting today. Motion to approve and a second, Any further discussion? All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye. You would pass.
Opposed? And that is done, which means you guys will officially take over as soon as we adjourn this meeting. And, oh, by the way, we're on adjournment, so can I get a motion to adjourn?
I moved to adjourn the meeting.
Second. Discussion. All those approve, say aye. Aye.
Oh, I think.
Great.